Hello, everyone, and welcome to My Strategy. I'm John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today and glad you can join us. My Strategy episodes are live. They're on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence, which is the ability to understand and control feelings. We're going to talk about the strengths of it, the signs of a person with a high emotional intelligence, ways to increase your emotional intelligence, the downsides of it, and also going to help you develop a strategy. All right, well, welcome everyone. Very happy to be here today. Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect on my strategy, but keep in mind that any time's a great time to reflect on your strategy. The show is growing. The My Strategy show is growing, I should say. We are now available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and more. So if you'd like to listen to this show in a podcast format, you can go out there and find it, or you can find other episodes. You can find me on most social media platforms. My Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn. That's @HawkinsJohn. And my website is johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals, because the best laid plans don't always work. This week, I am looking for stories on emotional intelligence. Do you have any examples, perhaps a tip or a trick you'd like to share? You can send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. So today, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. We're going to talk a little bit about what exactly it is, a little bit about the definition, learn a little bit about how it applies to our lives. We're then going to talk a little bit about some of the strengths of emotional intelligence. What are some of the things that you need to know to be strong in emotional intelligence? I'm going to talk a little bit about the background, where emotional intelligence originated. I'm going to talk about ways to increase your emotional intelligence. Then we're going to talk about the downside. It's the flip side of the conversation. For every strength, there potentially is a downside. So we're going to talk a little bit about the downside of being too emotionally intelligent. All right. So for starters, emotional intelligence, what is it? According to Cambridge Dictionary, it is the ability to understand and control your own feelings and to understand the feelings and react to them in a suitable way. Emotional intelligence is as important as academic intelligence. Goes on to say emotional intelligence, however, when someone is just book smart, they may not necessarily have emotional intelligence, and therefore they have a much harder time learning from their mistakes. I sometimes have a hard time learning from my mistakes, but I think that's what this show is all about. The show is all about personal development and finding a way to get better, even if it's just incremental changes. I've got an article here on emotional intelligence. The title is, What is Emotional Intelligence? Emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. Emotional intelligence is generally said to include at least 3 skills. Number 1, emotional awareness, or the ability to identify and name one's own emotions. The ability to harness those emotions and apply them to tasks like thinking and problem solving. And the ability to manage emotions, which includes both regulating one's own emotions when necessary and helping others to do the same. It says here, there's no validated psychometric test or scale for emotional intelligence as there is for G, in quotes, which is the general intelligence factor. And many argue that emotional intelligence is therefore not an actual construct, but a way of describing interpersonal skills that go by other names. Despite this criticism, the concept of emotional intelligence, sometimes referred to as emotional quotient, or EQ, has gained wide acceptance. In recent years, Some employers have even incorporated emotional intelligence tests into their application and interview process on the theory that someone high in emotional intelligence would make a better leader or coworker. While some studies have found a link between emotional intelligence and job performance, and many others have shown that there is no correlation and there is a lack of a scientific scale to show a measurable difference. I think you're going to find that as we go through today's podcast. Many times there's these different ideas that come forth, and many times they might seem like something brand new. But in this case, according to this article, what they're describing, a lot of what they're describing are what we would call soft skills. Soft skills. And as we know in listening to this show and many of our other segments, you'll know that it's very hard to test for soft skills, right? We can go test the IQ of someone. We can test for hard skills. There's ways to go in and give someone a test, and it comes back with a score. And that score will tell you how much they know about a specific topic. But when it comes to things like soft skills and emotional intelligence, it's very difficult to do. It goes on to say, what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent? An emotionally intelligent individual is both highly conscious of his or her emotional states, even negativity, frustration, sadness, or perhaps something more subtle, and able to identify and manage them. Such people are especially tuned into the emotion that others experience. It's important that a sensitivity to emotional signals from both within oneself and from one's social environment could make a better friend, parent, leader, or romantic partner. Fortunately, these skills can be honed. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional awareness, ability to harness those emotions and apply them to others. As I think about this topic today and apply it to our own personal development, how we can use it within our own in business as well. One thing really comes to mind. It's when you are in a situation and you act or react to it emotionally, many times it's difficult for us to control our reaction, the physical reaction. So emotional intelligence is the ability for us to really tune into that emotional sense, to be able to understand it better, to be able to understand when someone else might be in a situation, whether under stress or personal circumstances, where they might act in an emotional response as opposed to something that is more logical. And I think from my perspective, it's very important for us to be aware of this, especially as we focus on personal development on this show. If we're going to be able to interact with others, if we're going to be able to be top performers, if we're going to be able to handle all of those things that we're being asked to do in today, especially with the fact that we've got a pandemic going on, especially with the fact that, there's lots of civil unrest and other things that are going to be happening, emotion and stress is something that we absolutely have to deal with. For example, if you were hungry and didn't have enough food to eat, and you went a day or 2 days without eating and only drinking, how do you think you would respond to everyday work situations? If you were too caffeinated, how would you respond? That's where we need to start thinking about the emotional intelligence and really understanding what it is all about and how we can start to sense other people's emotions as well as our own. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about the strengths of emotional intelligence. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. Just keep in mind that my strategy shows are live on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Right before the break, we were talking about what exactly is emotional intelligence. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about some of the strengths of emotional intelligence. I've got an article here by Michael Akers and Grover Porter. It's called What is Emotional Intelligence? Also known as emotional quotient or EQ. For most people, emotional intelligence is more important than one's own intelligence in attaining success in their lives and careers. As individuals, our success and the success of the profession today depends on our ability to read other people's signals and react to them appropriately. Therefore, each one of us must develop the mature emotional intelligence skills required to better understand, empathize, and negotiate with other people, particularly as the economy continues to become more global. Otherwise, success will elude us in our lives and career. Your EQ, according to Michael Akers, is the level of your ability to understand other people, what motivates them, and how to cooperatively work with them, says Howard Gardner, the influential Harvard theorist. 5 major categories of emotional intelligence skills are recognized by researchers in this area. They go on to talk about them. First is self-awareness. The ability to recognize an emotion as it happens is the key to your EQ. Developing self-awareness requires tuning into your true feelings. If you evaluate your emotions, you can manage them. The majority of elements of self-awareness are emotional awareness, your ability to recognize your own emotions and their effects. Self-confidence, sureness about your self-worth and capabilities. So that's the first dimension. The second is self-regulation. You often have little control over when you experience emotions. You can, however, have some say in how long as emotion will last by using a number of techniques to alleviate negative emotions such as anger, anxiety, depression. A few of these skills include recasting a situation in a more positive light, taking a long walk, meditating, or prayer. That's what self-regulation involves. Self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, adaptability, and innovation. I want to pause here as we go through this because you're going to find that much of what we're talking about from personal development perspective, a lot of these theories, come together, and you might look at them in emotional intelligence, and much of what we're talking about are soft skills. Right? These are things that we've talked about. They're things that are values that we hold and have. So just note that while we're talking about emotional intelligence and talking and understanding it, there are other tie-ins and other podcasts that we've had on these specific soft skills. I think more it's about how we group them and how we pull them together. And again, there's different theories on what belongs in emotional intelligence. Motivation. To motivate yourself for any achievement requires clear goals and a positive attitude. Although you may have a predisposition to either a positive or negative attitude, you can, with effort and practice, learn to think more positively. Achievement-driven, commitment, initiative, optimism. Number 4 is empathy. The ability to recognize how people feel is important to success in your life and career. The more skillful you are at discerning the feelings behind other signals, the better you can control the signals that you send to them. An empathetic person excels at service orientation, anticipating, recognizing, and meeting a client's need even before they ask. Developing others, seeing what others need to progress and bolstering their abilities. Leveraging diversity, political awareness, understanding of others, discerning the feelings behind needs and wants of others. Number 5 is social skills. The development of good interpersonal skills is tantamount to success in your career and life. In today's always connected world, everyone has immediate access to technical knowledge. Thus, people skills are much more important than ever. I think that's true, right? As we find a way to use artificial intelligence, we find a way to do automation and make things simpler, quicker, faster. We also need to understand that we still are people, and we want to be treated as such. They go on to talk about some other factors at play in those folks with a high emotional quotient. It says here, how well you do in life and career is determined by both. IQ alone is not enough. EQ also matters. In fact, psychologists generally agree that amongst the ingredients for success, IQ roughly counts for only 10%, at best 25%. The rest depends on everything else, including EQ. A study of Harvard graduates in business law, medicine, and teaching showed a negative or zero correlation between an IQ indicator, exam entrance scores, and subsequent career success. These examples illustrate the importance of emotional competencies. You know, one of the things that this really points out to me is you look at all these examples of people in their careers who might not have had everything given to them, or people like Walt Disney who had very tough upbringing. Everything was against them. Nobody was really doing bets on them, but somehow they were able to make it through and excel. Maybe they were just very high in their emotional intelligence. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live in the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about the signs of a highly intelligent, an emotional intelligent person. I'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, if you're just joining us, welcome. Welcome to the show. My Strategy episodes are live on Saturdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to listen to a podcast, you can find them by Googling My Strategy. All right, right before the break, we were talking about the strengths of emotional intelligence. In fact, the whole show is dedicated to emotional intelligence. I've got an article here in Inc. magazine by Justin Bariso. It's titled "The 13 Signs of a High Emotional Intelligence." Ever wonder what emotional intelligence looks like in every day? He goes on to say, he starts off by saying, 1995 psychologist and science journalist Daniel Goleman published a book introducing most of the world to the nascent concept of emotional intelligence. The idea that an ability to understand and manage emotions greatly increases our chances of success. This quickly took off. And it went on to greatly influence the way people think about emotions and human behavior. Justin says, but what does emotional intelligence look like? How is it manifested in everyday life? He says for the past 2 years, he's been exploring that question in researching his forthcoming book, EQ Applied. And in doing so, he's identified a number of actions that illustrate how emotional intelligence appears in the real world. I always think it's good to have examples of what things are. For me, I need to look at these concepts from a number of different angles. First one he says is you think about feelings. Emotional intelligence begins with what is called self and social awareness, the ability to recognize emotions and their impact in both yourself and others. That begins with reflection. You ask questions like, what are my emotional strengths? What are my emotional weaknesses? How does my current mood affect my thoughts and decision making? What's going on under the surface that influences what others say or do? So you think about feelings. You think about feelings? I sometimes do. If somebody comes off as abrupt or rash, I do think what's going on in their lives, especially with what we have going on in the world today. I'm hypersensitive to that, so that's a checkbox, and you think about other feelings for me. Number 2 is you pause. The pause is as simple as taking a moment to stop and think before you speak or act. Easy in theory, difficult in practice. This can help save you from embarrassing moments or from making commitments too quickly. I think it's difficult for me to pause, especially when I'm doing a podcast. I'm expected to always be on. But in other meetings, in regular day, I do think I pause. Do you pause? Number 3 is you strive to control your thoughts. You don't have much control over the emotion you experience in a given moment, but you can control your reaction to those emotions by focusing on your thoughts. As it's been said, you can't prevent a bird from landing on your head, but you can prevent him from building a nest. Interesting. Number 4, you benefit from criticism. Nobody enjoys negative feedback, but you know that criticism is a chance to learn, even if it's not delivered in the best way, and even when it's unfounded. It gives you a window into how others think. And we did an episode a few weeks back on feedback. I think that's one of those things that I've been really trying to apply in my everyday life more and more is asking for that feedback, right? Criticism is something that people will give to you when you do something wrong. But when you do something right, you might get feedback or not. If you do something exceptional, you probably will. But if you always ask for it, it can help. You show authenticity. Authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything about yourself to everyone all the time. It does mean saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and sticking to your values and principles above all else. You demonstrate empathy. Empathy is the ability to show empathy, which includes understanding others' thoughts and feelings, helps you connect with others. Instead of judging or labeling others, you work hard to see it through their eyes. Also, perspective. We've done shows on perspective. You praise others. All humans crave acknowledgement and appreciation when you commend others. You satisfy those cravings and build trust. You give others feedback. Negative feedback has a great potential to hurt the feelings of others. Realizing this, you reframe criticism as a constructive feedback, so the recipient sees it as helpful instead of harmful. You apologize. It takes strength and courage to be able to say you're sorry, but doing so demonstrates humility, a quality that will naturally draw others to you. I might do a show on apologizing or not. I'm on the fence. I've heard studies say that it's important to apologize, and others say never apologize. I want to dive into that subject a little bit because I honestly don't know what the right answer is. Number 10, you forgive and forget. Hang on to resentment is like leaving a knife inside a wound. While the offending party moves on with their lives, you never give yourself the chance to heal. Forgiving and forgetting. Resentment. There's a few things in life that I hang on to and resent or regret, but for the most part, I try and let things go. This can be something that is very hard to do, right? Especially when you have dealt with traumatic events in your life. You keep your commitments. It's common nowadays for people to break an agreement or commitment when they feel like it. Of course, bailing on an evening of Netflix with a friend will cause less harm than breaking a promise to your child or missing a major business deadline. 12 is you help others. One of the greatest ways to positively impact the emotions of others is to help them. Many people don't really care where you graduated from or even about your previous accomplishments. But what about the hours you're willing to take off your schedule and help and listen to others? Finally, you protect yourself from emotional sabotage. You realize that emotional intelligence has a dark side, such as when individuals attempt to manipulate others. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about ways to increase your emotional intelligence. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, if you're just joining us, welcome. My Strategy radio show is all about personal development. We're live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. This week, we're talking about emotional intelligence. Which is the ability to understand and control feelings. Talking about the strengths, signs of a person with a high emotional intelligence, ways to increase your emotional intelligence, the downsides of emotional intelligence, and ways to develop your intelligence strategy. Right before the break, we were talking about signs of emotional intelligence. Learned a little bit about when the concept came about. It was 1995, and Daniel Goleman. In this segment, I want to talk about ways to increase your emotional intelligence. I've got an article here by Preston Nye. It's How to Increase Your Emotional Intelligence. It gives us 6 essentials for doing so. When our emotional intelligence is in a bad state, so is our level of self-esteem. We have to slow down, deal with what is troubling us, so that we can enjoy the simple joy of being happy and at peace with ourselves. It's a quote from Jess Scott. Emotional intelligence, EQ, or EI, can be defined as the ability to understand, manage, and effectively express one's own feelings, as well as engage and navigate successfully with those others. According to TalentSmart, 90% of high performers at the workplace possess a high EQ, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. Compare that to the 80% of low performers that have a low EQ. Emotional intelligence is absolutely essential in the formation, development, maintenance, and enhancement of close personal relationships. Unlike IQ, which does not change significantly over a lifetime, our EQ can evolve and increase with our desire to learn and grow. I think this is an important construct, important for us to be thinking about. Many times we have our IQs, as they state here, which are set and don't change much over your lifetime. We do have the ability to develop personal skills, to develop soft skills, to become better at handling emotions, at handling stress, at becoming leaders. So always know that while you might not have all of those skills to date, or maybe you just don't feel like you have them, but others might think you do, it's important for us to be confident and know that we can develop them. And that's what this show is all about, right? Personal development, helping us to be better every day. Below are 6 keys to increasing your emotional intelligence. The author says these are with references from their book. And if you're interested in gaining more insight, the article is How to Increase Your Emotional Intelligence, and those links are all in the blog. Number 1 says the ability to reduce negative emotions. Perhaps no aspect of EQ is more important than our ability to effectively manage our own negative emotions so they don't overwhelm us and affect our judgment. In order to change the way we feel about a situation, we must first change the way we think about it. Reduce negative personalization. When you feel adverse about someone's behavior, avoid jumping to a negative conclusion right away. Reducing the fear of rejection. One effective way to manage your fear of rejection is to provide yourself with multiple options in important situations so that no matter what happens, you have strong alternatives going forward. The ability to stay cool and manage stress. Most of us experience some levels of stress in life. How we handle stressful situations can make the difference between being assertive versus reactive, poised versus frazzled. When under pressure, the most important thing to do is to keep our cool. I really think this is a big one. How you handle stress is incredibly important, and I know we've done podcasts on that, but stress management is absolutely key. It says, A, if you feel nervous or anxious, put cold water on your face and get some fresh air. If you feel fearful, depressed, or disconnected, try intense aerobic activity. I will say that I have tried both of those at one point or another in my life. The ability to be assertive, number 3, is the ability to be assertive and express difficult emotions when necessary. Being who we are requires that we talk openly about things that are important to us, that we take a clear position on where we stand about important emotional issues, and that we clarify the limits of what is acceptable and tolerating in our relationships. The ability to stay proactive, not reactive, in the face of a difficult person. Raise your hand if you've had to deal with a difficult person in your lives. I think most all of us will raise our hands. How do you deal with those people? Do you just ignore them? What if you have to work with them? What if that difficult person is your boss or a significant other, spouse, sibling? When you feel angry and upset with someone, before you say something you might later regret, take a deep breath and count to 10 or 20 or 30 or leave the room. Another way to reduce reactivity is to try to put yourself in the difficult individual's shoes, even just for a moment. For example, consider the person you're dealing with. I think it's also important that there are things that cause a person not to act as they normally would. Substance abuse and other things that can cause them. So getting perspective on where they're coming from is important. Doesn't mean you can condone what they do. Doesn't mean you can't hold them accountable, but an understanding where they're coming from. The ability to bounce back from adversity. Number 6 is the ability to express intimate emotions in close personal relationships. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We've talked about the upside, so when we come back, we're going to talk about the downside, the dark side of being very emotionally intelligent. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Very happy to be here with you today. Today we're talking about emotional intelligence. The whole show has been focused on what it is, strengths, signs of an emotional intelligent person, and how we can increase our emotional intelligence. In this segment, I normally talk about strategy and how we go about developing it. But I thought it'd be important for today to talk about the downside of being too emotionally intelligent. Because for everything out there, there's always pluses and minuses, and sometimes pluses are good and it makes a positive. Sometimes there's too many minuses and it's a negative. And that's what life is all about. It's the ebb and flow. The sine wave of life and the sine wave of emotional intelligence is no different. The downside of being emotionally intelligent. Got an article here by Thomas Chamorro and Adam Yearsley. Article starts out by saying Gemma is extremely caring and sensitive. She pays a great deal of attention to others' emotions and is kind and considerate. Gemma is also quite optimistic she's usually upbeat and remains positive even in the face of bad news. Gemma's colleagues love working with her because they see her as a beacon of calm, no matter how much stress and pressure there is at work. Gemma's enthusiastic, never loses her cool. Her manager enjoys dealing with her, and she rarely complains about anything. She's reliable, dependable, shows a great level of organizational citizenship. Indeed, Gemma is extremely trustworthy, ethical. Furthermore, Gemma's personality also means that she is generally engaged at work, even when her boss is not doing a great job at managing her. Who wouldn't want to hire Gemma? In many ways, she seems like the ideal employee, someone with excellent potential for a career in management. If you agree, you're not alone. Most people would find Gemma's personality a great asset, and not just in work context. The main reason for this is Gemma's high emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, otherwise called EQ, which explains all the qualities described above. Though definitions vary, EQ always comprises intrapersonal and interpersonal skills, in particularly high adjustment, sociability, sensitivity, and prudence. Thousands of scientific studies have tested the importance of EQ in various domains of life, providing compelling evidence of the benefits to help with regard to work, health, relationships. EQ is positively correlated with leadership, job performance, job satisfaction, happiness, well-being, both physical and emotional. Moreover, EQ is negatively correlated with counterproductive work behaviors, psychopathy, and stress proclivity. But is higher EQ always beneficial? Although the downsides of higher EQ remains largely unexplored, there are many reasons for being cautious about adopting a one-size-fits-all or higher is always better take. Goes on to say most things in moderation. So what are some of the downsides? The author says lowered levels of creativity and innovation potential. There is a negative correlation between EQ and many traits that predispose individuals towards creativity and innovation. Creativity has long been associated with attributes that are characteristics of low EQ. Artistic moodiness, nonconformism, hostile impulsivity, and excitable up and down personalities. While it is, of course, possible for creative people to be emotionally intelligent, the more common pattern for people like Gemma is that they focus on building relationships and working with others. I can see that as being a case, right? If you are somebody who's extremely creative and someone who, goes into your own little world and comes out with beautiful art or has the ability to write or sing, you might not demonstrate high levels of emotional intelligence. The next thing the author says is difficulty giving and receiving negative feedback. At first glance, high EQ scorers like Gemma may seem to do well when it comes to giving and receiving feedback, for both involve social interactions. Scratch the surface, however, and you will see that Gemma's high interpersonal sensitivity and empathetic concern make it hard for her to deliver critical or negative feedback. High IQ scores like Gemma can be so highly adjusted and cool-headed that they may be indifferent to any negative feedback. It's an interesting perspective. I think there's some truth to it, right? Reluctance to ruffle other people's feathers. One of the main reasons for the appeal of Gemma's personality is that it epitomizes many of the qualities we look for in followers. Although people like Gemma are psychologically well endowed for entry-level or mid-level management jobs, senior leadership roles will require the ability to make unpopular choices, bring about change, focus on driving results, even at the expense of sacrificing employee relations. They're saying it could impact you if you are too high in your emotional intelligence. A well-developed ability to manipulate others, Gemma's high EQ may help her empathize and deliver a message that feels right to the audience. This is often a good thing, but taken too far, it can slide from influencing others to engaging in tactics of manipulation. The risks of overusing one's social skills is in focusing heavily on the emotional aspects of communicating, while neglecting logical arguments and the more transparent aspects of communication. Aversion to risk. This is all according to Thomas Chamorro in his article. But aversion to risk. Most innovative ventures require a balance between risk taking and risk avoidance. People like Gemma are more likely to play it safe and avoid bold choices. This is because high EQ is associated with higher levels of conscientiousness. In other words, the higher your EQ, the more likely it is that you'll resist your impulses and make measured decisions. The author goes on to say, to be clear, Gemma is no doubt a highly desirable employee, but her extremely high EQ makes her more suited to roles where regulating your own emotions and being able to sense and adapt to the emotional needs of others are pivotal. Salespeople, real estate agents, customer service reps, counselors, psychologists all benefit from EQs like Gemma's. In contrast, Gemma's profile might not be advantageous and perhaps a handicap in jobs focusing on creativity, innovation, leading change, or taking risks. So there you go. There's always a plus and minus to everything. Those are some of the downsides of being too high on the emotional intelligence scale, according to one author. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about putting your plan in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy. We're coming live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, in case you missed this broadcast, you can listen on iHeartRadio and Apple iTunes. And if you'd like to have something covered in the show, send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or give us a call at 844-MY-STRATEGY. That's 844-MY-STRATEGY. Well, this week we've been talking about emotional intelligence. Talking about emotional intelligence, which is the ability to understand and control feelings. Talking about the strengths, the signs of a person with high emotional intelligence, ways to increase your emotional intelligence, otherwise known as EQ, or emotional quotient. Also the downsides of EQ and ways to develop your intelligence strategy. We start off the show by talking about what is emotional intelligence, how it is the ability to understand and control our feelings and understand others' feelings as well, but not only understand them, but be able to react to them in a suitable way. Emotional intelligence includes at least 3 skills. It's the emotional awareness, ability to harness those emotions and apply them to tasks like thinking and problem solving, and the ability to manage emotions, our own emotions, and help others as well. There's many strengths to emotional intelligence. Strengths such as controlling your feelings, controlling the feelings of others, or helping. According to Dan Goleman, who founded The Concept in 1995 in his book, being self-conscious, autoregulation, encouragement, empathy, and socio-competencies are all important. Talked about some of the signs of a highly emotionally intelligent person. But what does it look like in everyday life? How do we apply this? We talked about thinking about feelings. You take a pause. Strive to control your own thoughts. You benefit from criticism. You're authentic, empathetic. You praise others, and many more signs. We then talked about ways to increase your emotional intelligence. If your emotional health is in a bad state, you have low self-esteem. We learned that 90% of high performers have a high EI or EQ score. 80% of low performers have a low score. And the ability to reduce negative emotions, stay cool, and manage stress, and be assertive is important. We also learned about the downsides. The downsides, according to an author, was that it could lead to lower levels of creativity and innovation potential, difficulty giving and receiving feedback, reluctant to ruffle other feathers, and ability to manipulate others. But again, there's all these pros and cons of anything. Like life, it's the ebb and flow, the ups and downs. But as we start to think about our strategy, it's important to be aware of those habits. And to break those habits, we have to identify those patterns. And if we're going to be aware of those patterns and break them, we need to replace them with new patterns, which means that we're going to need a conscious prioritization and commitment to our goals. And clarity always helps, and that's where a good coach can help. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time.